Minister, the government seems to be betting the economy on growth. To what extent are your department's environmental protection policies seen by the government to be blocking the path to growth?
Growth is essential, isn't it? Because if the economy's flatlined for well over a decade now, and if we don't grow the economy, we don't get the revenues to reinvest in our broken public services, and the British people won't get the pay rise that they so desperately need after 10 years of having their incomes flatlining as well. So growth is an essential. It's the primary mission of the whole government. DEFRA, as part of the government, is playing our part in making sure that growth can go ahead. I think the comments you repeated then about how DEFRA was seen are true of the past. DEFRA was seen as a blocker and not an enabler to growth. But the actions that we've taken since the general election have started to turn that around. So, in particular, the reform, the review I've commissioned from Dan Corrie into regulation, DEFRA's regulators, are intended to review whether or not they are enabling or blocking economic growth. And he's made his recommendations. We're still assessing those, but I'll be making an announcement very, very soon. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, where she made her intervention on better regulation a week or so ago, included some of the proposals that Dan Corrie came up with, one of which was appointing a lead regulator for bigger and more complex projects, so that instead of the developer having to navigate this complex architecture of regulation, there will be one lead regulator that will do it for them, and that makes the life of the developer easier. I think that's a very sensible approach to streamlining how regulation works. The second one, and the Chancellor referred to this as well, is that where you've got organisations that have a high degree of public trust on nature, organisations like the National Trust or the RSPB, then there will be a degree of earned autonomy over the applications that they would be putting forwards, so they don't have to go through the same process as everybody else. You can take a large proportion of applications for consent out of DEFRA's regulatory system that way, and therefore speed up the process for everybody else. The other point I'll make here is DEFRA is responsible for £104 billion worth of private sector investments that will be coming into the water sector over the next 5 years, starting on the 1st of April this year. That is the single biggest investment ever into the water sector, but it's also the second biggest private sector investment into any part of the economy over the lifetime of this Parliament, creating jobs and opportunities directly all across the country, but enabling growth and development in every part of the country as well. So with all of that, DEFRA is absolutely a department that is enabling growth.
Thank you. You mentioned streamlining for developers. My constituents in Tewkesbury might be concerned at that type of language, that actually what we might end up with is what we've had for the last 10 to 20 years, which are these piecemeal developments, all about the constituency with very little oversight and ability to plan that from the local authority. And what would you say to them?
Streamline doesn't mean weaken. If you look at what's been going on up until now, we've had a flatlining economy and nature in retreat. So it hasn't worked for economic growth, and it hasn't worked for nature, the old system, failing everywhere. Our intention is to streamline regulation but maintain the environmental standards so that we can both see the economic growth, the new homes that people in this country desperately want to see, but also have a means to finally turn the corner on nature's decline and on species decline. I think half of our bird species are at risk of domestic extinction, a third of our mammal species. We just can't go on like that. We've taken some steps towards that already, like banning pesticides, bee-killing pesticides, for instance, with no more opt-outs, reintroducing species like beavers. But in terms of regulation, we can do far better than both the economy and nature in decline. So the intention of things like the Nature Restoration Fund, which is part of the Planning and Infrastructure Bill going through today, is that it creates a sort of fund of money that can be spent on improving nature at scale across whole landscapes or whole communities, rather than doing it bat by bat in a way that failed in the past.
A lot of industry professionals have concerns that planning reforms are going to have an impact both on jobs across the sector and across regulations. What would you say to them?
Yeah, it'll have a huge impact. It'll. I mean, if I had a conversation with the guy from the US State Department who was responsible for the new US embassy being built in the Nine Elms area, and he'd been there for decades, and he'd built new US embassies in countries all over the world. And he said the level of red tape and delay in the UK was unparalleled anywhere other than in Rome and Baghdad, in his experience. And we need to be at the top of that table, not at the bottom of it, because we need to be bringing in international investment into this country and enabling development to happen. But we won't do it at the expense of nature. We'll do it in a way that allows nature to start to recover.
If I could just add to that, I mean, I've sort of seen some of the concerns raised about, for example, sort of implications for ecologists. There's a massive shortage of ecologists. I think what we're looking to do in some of these reforms, and they were prefigured in the regulation plan published last week, is actually sort of, if we can reduce the focus of some of our expert bodies on relatively low risk activities, relatively low risk permitting or licensing activities, you can actually release some of that expert resource to focus on projects that have much higher environmental value, intrinsic value. So really the reforms are they're not about reducing standards, they're actually about focusing expertise where it has maximum environmental benefit, and that will lie behind some of the consultation we'll bring forward on reforms to exemptions from environmental permitting, for example.
Thank you. It's already been mentioned, but the EAC recently visited the Netherlands, where it was highlighted, the benefits of long-term and joined-up planning, where sustainability and future-proofing are central to the usage of the land. Yeah. In Rotterdam, we went up a 3-storey structure, and you have orchards, you have allotments, you have green spaces, producing food, improving mental health, and helping to manage water. Mr. Hill, you stated that there's a dedicated unit working jointly between DEFRA and the Department for Transport. That's fantastic. What work is DEFRA doing alongside the Department for Health and Social Care and the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government to innovate appropriately, not just for 2030, but to 2050?
Yeah, well, my colleagues may have other things to add, but I'm working very closely with the Department for Health as well. On, for instance, the food strategy. That's something we're putting together a ministerial group that will be setting up a task force involving all appropriate stakeholders so that we can develop a food strategy. That obviously is of huge interest to the Department of Health, because each year in this country, there was a report published just over a year ago, each new year of kids are getting, in relative terms, shorter, fatter and sicker than the year before, and a large part of that is because they're eating bad calories rather than more nutritious calories. We have a bad food strategy in this country because it's entirely randomised. We want to sit down with all stakeholders, including retailers, including producers, consumers as well, to look at how we can give parents in particular better information to inform better choices about what is the best things to give their kids to eat. And there are many, many changes that we can make there. So there's one area where you couldn't do anything if you just did it in one department. You have to work cross-departmentally. And it's not just with the Department of Health in this case, it's also the Department for Business and Trade, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and the Department for Education, as well as DEFRA.
Yeah, it's that joined-upness that works so well in the Netherlands. So is there a plan for DEFRA to get around the table with those departments and have that discussion about
we've already started it. Yeah, we've already started doing it. Yeah.
Thank you.